So thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and thank you, Frank, for taking time to come and talk about the trust framework. This is an initial. We'll start with a high-level briefing, just because it's first time we're all sitting here talking about it. But obviously, if more deeper dives or follow-on sessions are needed, we can look at that in due course. But this is just our first get-together, so let's see where we get to today. Over to you, Frank.
Thanks, Zoe. Welcome, everybody. As Zoe said, this is going to be an initial overview of the trust framework, and I'll dip into a few specific details and a few examples as well. I have a mixture of text to describe things and some pictures to show you things. Some of the pictures look a bit complicated, but I'll try and point out the salient parts of them. Just wait. Here we go. I'm trying to figure out what the latency on my presentation is. So, hello, that's me. I'm the CTO at Icebreaker One, and I'm also the manager of the data services team, which provides various external facing services, such as our Open Net Zero service. So today, there's broadly two sets of things I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be talking through what Trust Framework is for, and talking through different aspects of it, such as the parts that make it up. I'll be looking a little bit of detail at assurance and the principles of building a trust framework. I'll be showing a few examples of how it can be implemented. I'll be talking a little bit about governance, and then I'll take questions. And my plan is to try and get through the presentation part where I'm talking in about 10 minutes, so that should leave a reasonable amount of time for questions. And then the second part is a bit of more technical dive into some specific architectural and authentication aspects of the trust framework, and also showing where the documentation is for it, for those of you who want to go and explore it yourself. And then we'll take some more questions before a wrap up. So what is a trust framework for? So trust framework, and these are words I've taken from published documents on IB1. Trust framework is an effective way to implement and automate adoption of rules for data providers, aggregators, and users in order to share data securely at a market-wide scale. And it enables assurable data flows between organizations peer-to-peer, and it verifies that organizations and their data sharing are compliant with the framework's rules. Now there's quite a lot of stuff to pick out of that. So the parts of the trust framework that make this possible are it provides discovery of shared and open data described by standard metadata that is agreed within the trust framework, and it's indexed in the open, so anyone can find the data that's available. Access control for sharing data between organizations, not individuals, organizations, by having access conditions that are published openly, so that anyone who discovers data that is available can see whether or not it's openly available, or whether or not there are certain criteria that they have to meet in order to be able to get to that data. And all of this is based on technology that was developed for and proven in open banking. I'll get into that more in the technical session later. The framework also has agreed definitions and rules for licensing terms, so that it's clear how the data can be used, for data access, so that it's clear who can get to it under what conditions, and for what we call data sensitivity, which are a relatively small number of classes that are used to categorize data from open through shared to closed. It also provides assurance levels that are defined separately for data and for organizations. And I'll show an example of that in a moment. And it provides governance processes through a steering group, advisory groups with a particular structure that I'll take you through, and these between them support policy and regulatory oversight, as well as ongoing evolution of the trust framework. Now, here's the first of a few potentially slightly bamboozling pictures. I've taken these from documents and standards that we've already published. I didn't want to try to restate things, but the important part here is the left side of this is where policy and regulation, commercial members, trade bodies, academia, and others want to collaborate, and so they between them define the rules of the road for a given trust framework, and then the framework implementation itself on the right allows organizations, potentially data aggregators or others, applications such as you might even have on mobile phones and data sources, and allows them to interact in ways that are consistent with the rules and policies that have been laid out and agreed on the left-hand side of the diagram. The advantage of doing this at a framework level, instead of doing it, peer-to-peer with different organizations establishing bilateral contracts for each thing they want to do, is that it creates a consistent set of rules that they deliver trust and they save time and money, because everybody knows what standard they need to meet to participate, and once they meet that standard, they know that they're playing at the same level as everybody else. Now, there are 5 principles for codifying trust framework rules that we believe make sense. The rules need to be cohesive so that the rules can be consistent across markets. They need to be interoperable so that common processes, frameworks, and connections can be established. There need to be legal principles so that the data rights, liability, redress, and so forth are all established. There need to be appropriate controls in place with, for example, rights-based consent management for access to data, and the principles and the framework itself needs to be open to the whole market, whatever the market happens to be. Again, open banking is a good example of how this worked. I'll talk a little bit about that later. Now, to try and put all of this into the stream context, the trust framework provides a set of unifying standards, policies, and mechanisms for shared data interchange between the organizations in the framework, but it also provides rules, formats, and licenses that create a consistent, assurable basis for publishing open data to anyone within or outside of the framework. And so it both helps organizations work together, and it helps those organizations make data available to others, such as the public or others, beyond their own particular group. And a known agreed framework for doing this speeds innovation, because everybody knows what APIs they're using, what data formats they're using. It reduces costs, because nobody should be reinventing the wheel where the wheel is already provided by the trust framework. And those taken together de-risk investment, because it's clear that the risks normally associated with any kind of development have been significantly reduced, because we already know how things are going to work. And this, as I say, has been certainly demonstrated by open banking, which is the place where we've taken some of the technology and ideas and principles from in order to generalize them to the trust frameworks that we are talking about. Now, to dip momentarily into assurance as a specific example, excuse me, we've been working to provide verification and assurance for both data and organizations separately. And one of the things we have are these little badges here, which you'll start to see. The top level ones say the level of assurance that a given organization has within the framework. And then the lower one provides the level of assurance and verification associated with the given data set published by an organization. And these are independent. Now, to break those down a little bit more, organizational assurance, it should be independent verification to allow an organization to demonstrate that they meet a particular standard or a particular set of rules, so that someone else knows, if that organization is publishing data, what kind of organization it is, and what they've gone through as an organization to demonstrate the veracity of what they do or who they are. This helps build confidence and helps engage with users beyond the organization, and that helps build a trusted market. And then data assurance helps you manage your data publishing process in terms of how you put the data together, how you clean it up or verify it, and what you say about it, such that other people can trust that what you say about it is accurate. That in turn will help users find and use that data. I'll show you an example of that in a moment. And all of that can help to reduce risk and build a trusted market of quality data, which is one of the things Icebreaker One, that's what we really focus on, making data work harder to get everybody to net zero. Now, a specific example of how assurance is working now is with Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, who have just made available a data portal using Icebreaker One's dataset assurance level and dataset sensitivity classes. I'm not entirely sure how legible that is, to be honest, but if you look at the top part, just underneath the paragraph describing the distribution shapefile data, you'll see the little D1 badge, which says that this data has met the first level of dataset assurance. And if you look at the last two lines of the text at the bottom, it just has what's called the Icebreaker One sensitivity class, which talks about how sensitive the data is. And in this case, it's rated at IB10, which means it's open data. And we also have the IB1 dataset assurance level, which is just a more technical way of describing what the badge means at the top. But those two things are published as part of the data in a machine-readable format, so that it's possible for this information to be surfaced through an API, so that other software can establish what the assurance level of the data is automatically. And then on Icebreaker One's Open Net Zero search service, which is available to discover Open Net Zero data, SSEN as an organization have been registered at the level 1 as an organization as well. And this is the thing that I'm not quite sure if we've got this live yet, but Chris will be able to answer this, that where we intend to make it possible to filter organizations and data sets based on their assurance levels, so that you can say, I'm only interested in data that meets a particular standard. Now, I'm going to do things a little bit more abstractly here. There are three broad ways that a trust framework can be implemented, either for just open data, but open data that can be verified, the source of that data and the quality of it. Shared data, which is restricted between participants within the framework, and then shared data, which is restricted and has an additional user consent constraint on it. So I'm going to show you what looks like the same picture more or less 3 times. The dark blob in the middle is the trust framework, and it implements an assurance directory, which describes the assurance levels, a license directory, which describes the different licenses that data is published through. And then there's a part in the middle, which is the verification service, which is used by, if an organization wants to get to data, they can use the verification service to verify information about the data or about the organization. In this case, because we're looking at open data, the data source can be made available directly to any consumer who's interested in it. And they can use the trust framework to establish what the license is, what the assurance level is, and to verify the organization. The second one, if you watch the circle on the right, it will change slightly, because this is for shared data. And in this case, in order to get access to data, the data consumer has to acquire a token from the trust framework that provides information to the data publisher about the attributes of the data consumer, so that the data consumer can say, I would like to get to this data, please. And the data provider can use that token and the trust framework to say, this is this kind of organization. It could be academia, it could be a charity, it could be one of their business partners, and so forth. And they can then choose which rules to apply to say, okay, we're prepared to allow researchers in, we're prepared to allow charities in, we're prepared to let our business partners get to this set of data. But other than that, you're not allowed in. And so this allows shared data to be published in a secure and verifiable way. And then finally, this example, you'll see that a user has now appeared on the right. And this is where, for example, in order to get access to data, you may have to acquire consent from a user. The trust framework itself doesn't necessarily handle that consent, but it provides the mechanism to allow the consent to be negotiated, so that that can be part of the information has to be provided in order to get access to the data. I realise that's gone through by quite quickly, but there's quite a lot of technical details I'm deliberately glossing over here because I just want to stay at a fairly high level at this point. Finally, I just want to talk a little bit about governance within trust frameworks. And so the trust frameworks have a steering group at the top, which appoints and oversees the work of the advisory groups. And the 5 threads of advisory groups are looking into user needs and impact, then looking into technical infrastructure, in other words, how to make it happen, looking into data licensing and legal constraints, looking into engagement and communications, so that that's broadly outward facing and PR, and finally looking into policy. And so each of these can be constituted with appropriate experts, and the framework itself provides a way for these different groups to interoperate under the oversight of the steering group. So that's the quick high-level tour of trust frameworks in general with a couple of examples. So I'm just going to open up to questions now. And I've got a couple of colleagues on the call who I may throw questions to because they're more likely to have better answers than me. So are there any questions?
I've got a question, Frank.
Go ahead.
Thanks, firstly, brilliant. Really neat overview of the trust framework, thank you. Just a question on the assurance. In that example, you kind of talked about like an icebreaker, one assurance process. What's the read across with other assurance schemes that are already kind of like widely adopted? And also, what was the motivation for creating a new one in the instance that in the scenario that you?
That's a great question, Melissa. I'm actually going to throw this to Chris because he spent a lot more time working on this than I have.
We actually built on Open Data Institute's framework as a sort of basis of this, but we felt that it didn't reach into organizational assurance, and it didn't cover non-open data. So we very much built upon that and some assurance ideas that come out of the open banking area. That we are aware of other assurance mechanisms and would like to reflect them. I think the idea is that the assurance that's suitable for a sector or suitable for coming together a trust framework can be different. So we've put out there a kind of vanilla. Here's what we think is a good place to start, and we're calling that the general trust framework, and that's kind of icebreaker one's almost like a trust framework playground. And then Open Energy has got its own, which is another trust framework, has got its own set of rules that may decide to adopt ours and just bless them, or it may say, okay, well, we like these, but we're going to take this and we're going to come up with our own. So it's very much the trust frameworks that steering group and advisory group comes together to decide this is part of the rules of the road, and that includes what assurance is relevant to this group.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I've just dropped a link to an Icebreaker One document explaining some trust framework aspects in more detail.
Thank you.
And one of the things it does is it basically highlights some of the things that Chris has been saying in more detail. Tara, hello.
Hi, sorry, my internet's not doing so well, so I'm not going to turn my camera on. Just had a question. On one of the earlier slides, you talked about who needs to be involved in this in terms of academia, in terms of companies, etc. I'm just wondering, within any of the sort of steering advisory groups, is there any involvement for some data subjects as well, where we're talking about potentially aggregated data about consumers and customers?
Absolutely. There's the makeup of the participants in the advisory groups is determined entirely by the steering group. And so if they feel that it's appropriate to have data subjects, end users, or others involved, then absolutely, there's no restrictions on that. The framework itself is agnostic as to who best people are to have in the advisory groups.
Yeah, I think it might be worth having it in as a sort of a prompt suggestion, because I think on sort of the ethical side of things and the building trust side of things, it would be advisory to have that in there.
Okay. Cool. Jessica.
Hey, Frank. Yes, again, just echoing Melissa, thank you for the presentation. That was really helpful. I was wondering if anyone from the Icebreaker team could just share a bit more light about kind of the trust framework in the Stream context. I know you had a kind of putting what a trust framework is in the context, but just a bit more around what might be delivered as part of the trust framework.
Okay, I think I'll ask Paul to answer this, if you don't mind, Paul.
Oh, thanks. So we did actually have this discussion this morning, just to try and come up with some ideas to try and put it into a little bit more context. For Stream, it could be a range of things, but the ones that come to mind when I think about what the trust framework could do are things like agreeing on standard licenses. So the trust framework could be the place where all the water companies and all the users come together and decide that actually for open data, this is the license we're going to use for water data. Or it could be that they all agree on a standard format. So you find that there are a number of users that say that we particularly want the data in a specific format, and the water companies all agree to provide the data, the open data and shared data in that format. Two very, very simple examples, but what that does is then mean that the water companies don't have to think too hard when producing the data. They don't have to go, well, what format and how are we going to get it, and what's the license? They don't have to do that. They go, this is the license, this is the, and it simplifies that part of the process for legal and for everybody else, but it also simplifies the process for users because they know that the data that's going to come out is of a certain type and in a certain license. So any new data set that comes out isn't going to be a surprise. So there's no extra work that they're going to need to do on their side. So what you're doing is creating a system, a framework that basically gives everybody a lot more understanding of what's going to come in the future. Does that kind of give you the beginnings of what we're talking about, or what we could be talking about, like some concrete examples?
I think so, yes. I think licenses and kind of agreements on standard formats are all things which absolutely Stream will need to kind of come to some foundational principles on. So yeah, I definitely see the need for those things.
Thanks, Jessica. I'll take a question from Terry and then I'll carry on with the more technical part.
Terry, you're on mute.
Still on mute.
Terry, do you want to type your answer question to me and I'll ask it? Sorry, Terry, did you type it?
Did something happen? Or shall we carry on?
So yeah, his headset's not working, so we'll get back to that in a second. No worries.
Yeah, if you pop your question in the chat and we'll get back to it, but I think I'll continue for now because time is pressing. So if I comment a little bit now on the architecture of the functional part of the trust framework rather than the legal or other aspects of it. The architecture itself broadly splits into the dark box at the top are the operational services, and they provide indexing and discovery of data sets. And with that, there's a mechanism to pull in metadata published by organizations within the trust framework, which is part of us having a level of verifiability on the data, because we know we were pointed at the metadata by the organization in its directory entry, which is something that they have control over. The trust framework platform itself also generates authentication tokens and verifies and supports token introspection for clients that want more details on any given organization. And also a member management portion, which I won't really get into just now, but that's basically where additional information about organizations and trust framework can be kept. At the bottom, broadly, there's a data provider on the bottom right, and that data provider may publish data openly through an open data API, in which case that's the unsecured call to that from the open data user on the bottom left. That doesn't even need to touch the trust framework, except insofar as someone wants to verify the organization or data. A third-party provider may also exist who consumes data from the data provider, and if they can consume the open data, or if they consume shared data, that's when what's called a FAPI secured call comes in. Now, FAPI is the financial grade API, and that was developed as part of the open banking process, but it's now an international standard published in association with OpenID. And we're using that because of the high level of verification and security it gives us on those interactions. And it also provides us with a mechanism to verify at a peer-to-peer level, but the peers here are organizations, not individuals, that for every single call, each call can be verified that the appropriate organization has the right access to the data that's being requested. And this means that because it's a standardized mechanism for defining who can get to what, and it means that all the different participants who are publishing data within a given trust framework are all following the same technical rules, and they're following the same technical verification. And so that makes it easier for anyone who's participating to know which data they should be able to get access to and what the conditions are. So the authentication flow is you start at, this is just a standard flow diagram. The data consumer obtains a token, which is a bearer token that they will use to interact with an API at a data provider. Just to be clear, by the way, there's no data stored in the trust framework. It's purely an access mechanism to allow different participants to know who each other is, what terms they're allowed to exchange data, and to do that reliably. So the data consumer requests from the trust framework an access token, and the trust framework generates a token based on that data consumer's entry in the trust framework, and then gives that back to the data consumer. The data consumer can then use that token to talk directly to a data provider to say, I would like access to this data, please, and here is my trust framework token. The data provider then asks the trust framework for more details about who is making the request. And what that really means is that the request itself doesn't contain those details. It just contains an opaque identifier that is used by the trust framework to look those details up and provide them to the data provider. And if the rules that the data provider applies to requests allow the organization to pass, then it can come in and get the data. Otherwise, it will be denied access. The tokens themselves also have an expiry time built into them, and that expiry time can be set according to the data consumer and other rules of the trust framework. And finally, what I'm going to do here is simply say we have documentation at docs.icebreaker1.org, which explains all of this in tremendous detail. And rather than try and identify those parts of the technical implementation of the trust framework, and figure out which ones are of interest. I'd rather those open to questions right away, so that you can ask anything you want about how things are implemented. So, any questions on that? Well, hello, Terry's posted a question meanwhile. So, the opportunity to apply benefits to MVPs. Comment regarding Open Energy having its own trust framework. What's driven the divergence, and how should AME interact between Open Energy and IB1? I think actually, again, Chris is probably the best person to answer this.
Yeah, I can pick that one up. Thanks, Frank. There is no technical divergence. So just so we're clear, Open Energy's trust framework operates on the same rails that Frank's just demonstrated. But it has its own steering group and advisory group. And as a for instance, Open Energy may define different roles for organizations based on the energy sector's requirements for access control and the particular ecosystem they have compared to others. So what an organization would typically do, if you were a data provider operating in several trust frameworks, so your data could be used in energy, could be used in water, could be used in name another sector, you would have different potential requirements based on the trust framework agreements, the access controls they've agreed, the data format controls and so on. So in publishing to those, you need to play by that trust framework's rules. But as a data publisher, you can be in multiple trust frameworks, and you provide endpoints that obey the rules. But the fundamental mechanisms are identical. It's really just who you're asking for identity services from, and what role, what other attributes of your software are required as the technical spec, if you like, for that trust framework.
Thanks, Chris. Just to follow up on that as well, we talked about assurance levels. It's also quite possibly the case that different trust framework will have different criteria for the way it assures data. Because we can't assume that assurance levels are going to be one size fits all.
So some of the things we are trying to drive convergence on, and it doesn't mean we insist on it, but it would, that we lean on is, we mentioned data sensitivity classes. We, as part of the Open Energy work, defined a set of data sensitivity classes, including open, there's shared, closed, there is containing personal identifier information, and so on. We think it is of a benefit in general to the sector to continue to use those and to evolve them together. Sorry, for cross sectors, to evolve them together so that the meaning remains the same across sectors. We also want to see the smallest feasible set of license conditions growing, so that again you've got more chance for cross-sector data usage by not growing a whole set of different license conditions in different sectors. So we encourage that, and we will speak in the steering groups and advisory groups in support of adopting standards where possible, but it's down to the individual sectors designing collaborating on the design of their trust frameworks to decide quite where they go. So we can't, if it really is imperative for a sector to go in a particular direction, then that's what it will decide to do.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I didn't want to imply that we're encouraging 100 different sets of standards, but we are kind of, as you say, we are strongly encouraging certain things, but we don't require them, because it may make sense for a given sector to start in a different place or evolve at a different pace. But we do hope, as Melissa points out in the chat, that if everyone can see the benefits of alignment, then different participants and even different sectors may naturally choose to align in ways that makes cross-sector data interchange possible and easy. Thanks, Chris. Any other questions? Ooh. I never know if this is good or bad at this point. There aren't that many questions.
Maybe just a bit of time to digest. Probably there's been a lot of information, but what I would say, it's not a one chance only. So we will share these slides with you. Obviously, you've got the link for the docs. Those of you who like to dig in really into the weeds, but obviously, if after you've had a bit of time to think about it, you have questions, do come back to us. We've got our water@icebreaker.one.org, and perhaps also keep Jess in copy as well. And then if there's any needs for specific follow-ups, or we can target a specific area, we can look at that. In the meantime, Paul will be working, I'm sure, with Terry and team and on the data standards and things like that. And we'll be trying to go into more detail of the specifics of what we'll do for Stream, but it's early days, things are being figured out, but so there will be more info on these points in due course.
And thanks, Zoe. And just to confirm something, Chris, am I right in thinking that the assurance work is still part of an open consultation?
Yeah, that's right. It's we're consulting on it to the end of the year, and we'll probably have, depending on whether the consultation doesn't just give it a green light, that never happens, we'll probably have an iteration on it next year. Just a small point on the assurance is currently Open Energy does not have its own hand-rolled assurance. We're consulting with them on whether they need that, and again leaning towards potentially updating ours and them adopting it rather than them diverging from it. But again, this is quite new news. This is really been worked on in the past 6 months or so, and just released in the last 2 months or so.
Martin, Terry, I'm going to cavalierly assume that your hand has just been up the whole time, even though your mic doesn't work, but you've asked the question you wanted. No worries. Martin, you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi, Frank. One question. Is the Open Trust framework that was developed for the Open Energy in the public domain as well, for people to kind of read about and see how it differs from what you guys presented?
In the sense that we work in the open, yes. It depends on me by public domain, because that's different from openly available. But yes, it's openly available.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Well, given it's a couple of minutes to the end of the slot, unless anyone has any other questions, I encourage you to take Zoe's advice and go away and read things and digest, and then get back to us if you have anything more you want to get clarity on, or if you have any, in particular, if you have any feedback or input on our open consultations, that would be most welcome. And other than that, I'm happy to say thanks to everybody for attending. I hope you got something out of it, and have an early lunch.
Thank you very much, Frank, and Chris and Paul as well. And thanks everybody for your questions. Do keep them coming. I think it's important that we all understand and that we, answer anything that's unsure. So do let us know when you've had some time to think. But probably you're all thinking about lunch right now. So have a good lunch break if that's where you're headed, and a good rest of day. And we'll speak soon.